I am Paul Gray, engineer, teacher, and president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. There are many ways to learn. One of the best is through reflection on the example provided by others. Dr. Ronald E. McNair is one such example. Dr. McNair, in his life, has provided inspiration for thousands through the examples of his work, his family, his lifestyle. This was true when he was a graduate student at MIT, and it is true now. Ron McNair celebrated life in all its complexity, its diversity, and its richness. And he shared his dreams and his accomplishments with others. This film will give you some idea of the accomplishments and of the dreams which made Ron McNair's life so memorable.
T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
Houston.
Okay, Mary, we've reached the point where I'm ready for the RF.
On February 3rd, 1984, the Space Shuttle Challenger began its first orbit of a complex mission, one of the most ambitious NASA had launched. The five-man crew included Lake City, South Carolina native Dr. Ronald E. McNair, a mission specialist aboard the flight.
Dr. McNair affirms that the restraints have been removed and the spin-up is in progress.
Among McNair's responsibilities, the launch of a Hughes communication satellite from the cargo bay of the shuttle.
Bingo. Very good. Okay.
This was McNair's first spaceflight, an experience he later found difficult to describe.
You really cannot tell anybody that. Films, pictures, movies, words, nothing is like being there.
Okay, open up 3 steps from the setting used for the stills.
Astronaut, research scientist, karate champion, accomplished jazz musician, devoted family man, motivator of young people. Ron McNair, in his 35 years, managed to fill all these roles and more.
Ron felt that life was something that you had to live right on the ragged edge all the time in order to get anything out of it. So, you know, his philosophy was you go as far as you humanly think you can do and then one step farther.
Ron McNair was a risk-taker, willing to face the hazards that stood between where he was and where he wanted to be. He died the best way anyone can, doing exactly what he wanted, flying aboard the Shuttle Challenger on his way into space for a second time. The willingness to risk that led Ron McNair to the astronaut program first began to develop a long way from Earth orbit. It started in Ron's hometown of Lake City in the state's tobacco-producing PD region. Ron was born here on October 21st, 1950.
Just being here and looking around, you know, the memories come back now.
Recently, Wallace Scott walked through the old neighborhood in Lake City and talked about growing up here with his childhood friend, Ron McNair.
His grandparents had a barn back there, and we would go back there and jump in the barn and jump down in the hay and everything, and we all get together, you know, play about an hour, and then we split back up. Homework and whatever, chores.
Children still play in these streets, just as Ron did when he was a child. But his father, who owned an auto body shop at the time, says Ron also showed an early interest in work.
Every day he would rush from school. He'd have his lunch.
then he would take off from my shop. He would come to the shop and just beg me, Dad, let me do this, let me do that. He always wanted to work.
And that carried over into his schoolwork. In Rosa Connor's 7th grade science class, the determination to learn and excel that would distinguish Ron's later life was already evident.
If you should check something wrong on his paper, you had to take time and give him an explanation because he was really interested in having everything right.
Ron's drive for excellence was not limited to science and math. His high school English teacher, Gertrude Porter Green.
But Ron always came out on top on all the testing, and most of the time when you're dealing with recitation in the classroom and all, he just seemed to have a better grasp of the subject matter.
Ron's enthusiasm for school usually led him to a front row seat. His mother, a longtime teacher, agrees he had a vital interest in learning, but says he was more than just a good student.
A lot of people have in mind that he was bookworm, so to speak, that he sat there and studied all the time. He did not. He did just what other children did.
In high school, he was captain of the football team, captain of the track team. They had a baseball team. He was captain of that.
The Carver Junior High School Band in Lake City is still led by the man who, in the early 60s, began helping Ron explore his interest in music.
Ron was very serious. I thought at one time that he might have gone into music, but he decided against it.
Instead, he went to North Carolina A&T to study physics, a decision he had made while attending high school in Lake City.
I left there with the intentions of receiving a PhD in physics within 10 years was my goal. I made that decision as a junior in high school when a chemistry instructor asked me to write a paper entitled 10 Years Hence.
McNair knew what he wanted, but he didn't yet know what he faced. His arrival at North Carolina A&T led to a confrontation with reality and a temporary lapse of confidence.
Well, I showed up and they put me in a group with all the other physics majors from the big schools up north, New York, and Chicago, and Washington. And I heard all the guys talking about all of the great physics courses they'd taken. They'd taken these great courses in thermodynamics and classical mechanics and modern physics. And I knew that the only physics that I knew anything about was the theory of propagation of tobacco leaves.
McNair briefly considered a music major, but he decided to face the challenge of physics. That choice proved to be a good one. McNair graduated magna cum laude from North Carolina A&T in 1971. But his fight to get a PhD was not over. His next round came in Boston at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. His first encounter with this world-class university produced another crisis of confidence. Friend and physics professor Michael Feld.
He began to think about all of his fears. He said, what did I know about MIT? I had heard that the janitors have master's degrees, that all of the vending machines had slide rules at them.
But again, McNair refused to be intimidated. He pushed ahead despite his doubts and continued to pursue the goal he set in high school, a PhD in physics. MIT students today conduct their experiments in the same labs where Ron McNair struggled with the demands of an MIT education.
The average MIT graduate student in physics works maybe 60 hours a week. Oftentimes, people work on weekends or at nights. A famous old saying is that getting an education at MIT is like taking a drink from a fire hose. And there's just so much coming at you all the time.
McNair met the demands and in doing so performed some of the earliest development of chemical lasers. But life in Boston wasn't all work. McNair, the South Carolina native, had time to meet the woman who would become his wife, Cheryl Moore of Jamaica, New York.
We met in Massachusetts at a church that we both attended, St. Paul AME Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we were both attending a potluck dinner session that was held every week.
Ron and Cheryl began to date and were eventually married at this community church just a few blocks from the MIT campus in Cambridge in the Boston area. McNair's lab was just across the street from the Charles River. Ron and Cheryl were together in this beautiful setting when he suffered a setback that would have been a disaster for most people. As they stopped to take in the beauty, McNair put down a duffel bag containing all his laser research data. When he went back for it a few minutes later, the bag had disappeared. Years' worth of work had been stolen.
And I thought, oh no, what do we do? What is he going to do?
I know he was a little upset. He was very upset, but he didn't make much of it.
He just kind of looked quietly and said, well, let me think a little while.
But he just went back into the laboratory, and within about 3 or 4 months, he took all of the data again.
Ron McNair's refusal to give up paid off. He earned his PhD in physics at 26, 1 month before his self-imposed 10-year deadline. Following graduation, Ron and Cheryl left MIT for Malibu, California, where in 1976, Ron began his work as a staff physicist for Hughes Research Laboratories. McNair was still doing research work in California when he learned that NASA was searching for specialists to fly in the new space shuttle program.
I'd been out of graduate school for a couple of years when NASA made the call for scientists to fly the shuttle. And my credentials were, the credentials were in order, and it sparked an old latent desire to be an astronaut.
He applied and told his brother he was going to be an astronaut.
I says, well, did they tell you you were going to be an astronaut? He says, no. He says, well, I said, well, how do you know? He says, well, I qualified. I just know. And by that time, I thought he had jumped off on a deep end, to tell you the truth.
But Ron McNair's confidence was well-founded. 11,000 people applied for the program. He was one of 35 selected for training. Ron and Cheryl moved to Texas and the sprawling city of Houston, home of the Johnson Space Center. McNair began his astronaut training here in the late summer of 1978. After a year of rigorous astronaut training and evaluation, he became eligible for assignment as a mission specialist aboard the space shuttle. McNair said he hadn't found the training program to be especially difficult.
The whole entire show program was designed for most individuals. Does not require the strenuous type of training and conditioning that may have been required in the early Mercury and Gemini days.
Had the training program been more difficult, there's little doubt McNair could have handled it. After all, he had the stamina to become a 5th-degree black belt in karate. He loved the sport and made practicing and teaching a top priority.
Karate is something that I schedule and everything else works around it.
He established a class here at Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church in Houston. One of his earliest pupils, now head instructor of the class, remembers McNair as a leader who required the most of himself and his students.
He was very demanding as far as discipline, stamina, having your stamina up, and just everything, being active in the community. He was a complete teacher.
The self-discipline that served McNair in karate also helped him master another interest, music. He specialized in jazz saxophone.
Very creative type of, it's an artwork. One is able to project his feelings through the instrument, and one is able to express, and express creatively, and that's what I enjoy about it.
With all his interests, McNair still found time to be a devoted family man and father. The 2 McNair children, Reggie and Joy, were born after Ron and Cheryl moved to Houston. Reggie is now 4, Joy is 2. Their father took delight in both children.
Joy, he just loved when he came home playing with him, and he would, I can recall, pick her up, and she just thought that was just the greatest. He had a great time with the kids, and the kids just had a ball with him. In fact, he took Reggie to karate with him, and I guess he was about 2 months old.
Like many fathers, McNair quickly began making plans for his children. It seems he wanted his son Reggie to follow in his footsteps.
My son is already an astronaut. He's just waiting for his flight.
McNair had completed his basic astronaut training in 1979, before the children were born. Later, when he was assigned to the crew of a shuttle flight that would lift off in 1984, he began the detailed, specific preparation for that mission. Fellow astronaut and South Carolinian Charles Bolden was a close friend of McNair's. Bolden says mission training gets very intense shortly before a flight.
It starts getting very demanding as you get to about the 6-month point prior to your flight. And that's when you really get deeply involved in your mission-specific training. Like everything that Ron did, he approached it, I guess, with vigor and excitement.
Astronauts who flew with McNair on that 1984 mission were impressed with his approach.
He picked things up very quickly, had a very logical, organized, scientific mind, as you might expect for somebody that's gotten a PhD from MIT.
Ron, he was just very enthusiastic, and he wanted to do everything. We wouldn't have had the time and the day to train for everything that he wanted to do.
This was the day Ron McNair had been waiting for. His family and friends had come to the Cape to watch the launch.
T-minus 23 seconds and counting.
Childhood friend Wallace Scott watched as the countdown continued.
T-minus 15, 14.
It was like a rejoicing time, and all I could hear from the ones that left Lake City going to see Ron lift off was go around and go.
We have main engine start. 3,
2, 1, at T-minus 0, I got a boot like I've never felt, and the vibration simply shook every nut and bolt in the whole place. And that 4 million pound vehicle literally lurched, leaped off of the launch pad, and we were on our way.
Once in orbit, McNair began to adjust to the novelty of spaceflight.
No words. I'm sorry, there just aren't any words. There just aren't any words. It's completely, somehow, otherworldly in that things do not happen the same way they happen in this world.
Flight Commander Vance Brand said, despite the newness of the experience, McNair adjusted well.
I think he adapted to space more quickly than any of us.
With the mission only hours old, McNair went to work. One of his jobs was the launch of a communications satellite from the cargo bay of the shuttle.
We got into the West Star deployment on the first day. It was our first major activity, and things ticked along quite well throughout the entire deployment.
The launch from the shuttle had gone perfectly, but later a satellite engine failed, robbing the mission of a successful deployment. No disappointment marred another major project involving McNair, one of a series of firsts on this mission. Complete success marked the use of the shuttle manipulator arm to position an astronaut during a spacewalk.
For those operations, Ron was operating the manipulator from inside the spacecraft, and I or Bob were standing on this work platform outside, being moved around from location to location.
Okay, I got you.
It worked out quite smoothly, and we were able to get them positioned exactly where they wanted to go. And that manipulated foot restraint turns out to be a very convenient, useful workstation.
The spacewalkers also tested the new manned maneuvering unit. For the first time, astronauts ventured away from the spacecraft without the security of a safety line. Back inside the shuttle, McNair had responsibility for all the scientific experiments on the flight. That work was among the mission objectives President Reagan wanted to know more about when he talked to the crew from the White House.
I understand that you have one dealing with arthritis and other experiments on board that may lead to advances in manufacturing and various kinds of material processing.
Yes, sir, Mr. President, the experiments are working out very well. We're very pleased with the results we're seeing, and there's a lot of promise being demonstrated in all the areas you just mentioned, and we look forward to getting them back on the ground and analyze and make some good use of these results.
McNair, the serious scientist, also played the role of McNair, the movie maker, during the flight.
He was also, I think, personally amused by the situation because he carried along a little black beret and a name tag that said Cecil B. McNair after the Cecil B. DeMille.
The film project, Cinema 360, captured the spectacular panorama from space. The motion picture can now be seen at a number of planetariums around the country. The overwhelming beauty from space has inspired some who have experienced it firsthand to make new spiritual connections in their lives. But McNair said for him, it simply reinforced the spirituality he already possessed.
Well, I suppose it could give you a spiritual outlook if you didn't have one to start with. But that's not the case in my case. And being in space was not any different from being on Earth from a spiritual perspective.
With the flight almost over, one mission objective still remained, the first shuttle landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The heat of re-entry cloaked the shuttle in a red plasma glow as it left Earth orbit. Unlike previous landings on the large dry lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base in California, this landing on a much smaller strip in Florida had little margin for error. With that touchdown, Challenger Mission 41B claimed another first. The flight made McNair a much sought-after hero in South Carolina. He expressed his gratitude during a commencement address at the University of South Carolina.
To go around the world 128 times at 17,500 miles per hour aboard the Rolls-Royce of spaceflight is one experience, but to come home amidst warmth and appreciation is an experience of equal magnitude. I shall eternally be grateful for this recognition.
McNair took every opportunity to encourage young people to make the most of their lives. When he visited his family in Lake City, he made a point of going by his old school.
Whenever he came to Lake City, he would always come by to see us. And he would come by the schools and talk to the students. And I think all of the students got to know him and loved him as much as we did. Advocating education has been a pet project of mine long before NASA ever thought about me or ever thought about NASA. As a physicist, as an educator, as a teacher, that's always been a priority item on my agenda.
McNair urged students to develop the traits and attitudes he found valuable in his life. Characteristics like his calm willingness to face uncertainty impressed his brother Carl.
I think he had a high degree of discipline, a high degree of tolerance in terms of worry. You know, if something was, if he was able to do something about it, he would. If he couldn't, he wouldn't worry about it.
That approach to life served McNair well as he prepared for his next mission. He looked forward to his second trip into space. In the early morning of January 28, 1986, McNair and his fellow crew members climbed aboard the shuttle Challenger and readied for liftoff. In addition to the astronauts and scientists on board, the mission carried Krista McAuliffe, selected to be the first teacher in space. At 11:38 that morning, Challenger lifted off the pad. 1 minute and 13 seconds into the flight, an explosion claimed the lives of all on board. South Carolina mourned the loss of a brave native son. Memorial services in Columbia and Lake City helped express the grief of those who were close to McNair and those who knew him only as a fallen astronaut. And finally, the funeral and burial as Ronald McNair returned to the land where he was born. He will not be forgotten. In his hometown, a street now bears his name, and his old school soon will. In Houston, a park in the family neighborhood has been dedicated in his memory, and the church recreation center where he established a karate class carries his name. At McNair's alma mater in Boston, important space medicine research is conducted. And just last month, the MIT community gathered to rename the building where the experiments take place the Ronald E. McNair Building, a rare honor.
We don't have a lot of buildings to name, and when we do dedicate one, we do it with the greatest of care and the greatest of deliberation.
The honors are nice. They are deserved. But it seems a safe guess that Ron McNair would rather be remembered for the life he lived and the message that life carried, a message best expressed by those who knew him.
I think were Ron to be able to get anybody to adopt any philosophy that he espoused, it would probably be that of hanging it over the edge, living a person's life to the fullest.
Decide what you want to do, and then don't be discouraged by people who tell you that it may be too difficult for you to do.
No matter where you come from, no matter what your background, if you are willing to work
hard, they have to struggle. They're not going to have everything like they want it all the time. And nothing comes easy. And I believe that from Lake City community, we will have some others who will try to follow in Ron's footsteps.
Toward that end, the McNair family has established a scholarship fund in his honor.
It's designed to provide scholarships for study in the science and technologies for underprivileged young people.
Mommy, I'm gonna slide. I'm gonna go down the slide.
The spirit of Ronald McNair, his example, his influence, lives on in many ways. But most importantly, his spirit lives on in the minds of those he loved, his family, his children.
They remember a lot about him. Joy will even point to the saxophone case and say, that's Daddy's saxophone. Or if she sees an article of his, a shirt or whatever, she'll say, that's Daddy's. And Reggie is adjusting. He was very close to his dad, but he just asked, well, you know, Daddy is still with us. And I said, yes, he is. We can still feel him, and he still loves us.
I hope that this film gave you a sense of Ron McNair, astronaut and scientist, husband and father, musician, athlete, and man of the spirit. The film captures the mission of Ron McNair's life. That is a mission which cannot continue with him, but which lives on in the Ron McNair Foundation. The goals of the foundation are to encourage young men and women to compete for educational scholarships for study in fields such as engineering, aerospace, and related scientific disciplines. To honor innovation, both American and foreign, in fields related to space commercialization, technology, and medicine. To promote interest in the arts, not just the artist, as a means for refreshment and relaxation for all of us. To encourage higher standards of physical fitness for persons of all ages. And to speak out for freedom of thought, particularly for the basic freedom of all people to worship their God. I hope that you will accept the challenge for the future and will wish to make a commitment now to support the Ron McNair Foundation. The foundation, through its activities, underwrites the support of the education of young people and encourages scientific and technological innovation. The publications of the foundation will help you stay informed about activities in space and space technology that affect our lives, and will help you learn about important issues in science, technology, and society. Being a challenger for the future is the first step. The Ron McNair Foundation. It deserves the support of all of us.